Hello, this is the final lesson in the scheme of work for religion and beliefs, which of course is on paper 2 of the AQA A-level syllabus. This last little lesson is all about ideology, and of course we continue to understand the sociological perspectives of religion, understand how these different theories explain the functions and roles of religion and how religion can contribute to social stability, and of course be able to evaluate different sociological definitions and theories of religion, which we've been doing throughout. Now this one actually, as a final one, is a little bit different because whilst I'm hoping that by the end of this session you'll be able to make a lot of connections between what we talk about and religion, I'm not going to be talking about religion as explicitly as we have done in previous lessons. And this because this is an in-depth look at ideology, referring back to some of the ideas we looked at throughout the course and expanding on some of those ideas. But hopefully, as I said, you'll be able to make the connections between what we study here and what we've looked at in religion. So, ideology. Well, just as a refresher to you, ideology, and you can put this at the top of your booklets, is a worldview or a set of ideas and values. In other words, it's kind of like a belief system, okay? And sometimes these could be, hopefully you can see already, a connection with religion because your religious beliefs are your belief system. That would be the way you view the world, your set of ideas and values. But equally, it could be something like a political set of ideologies, a way you see the world based on your political beliefs. Anyway, whatever those might be, whether religious, political or otherwise, let's have a little think. When we have a set of ideas and values, when we have a worldview, what is the function of these ideologies? What purpose do they serve in society? How do they benefit people and society? But also, in what ways might ideologies do harm to people or society? Just put your ideas down in the booklet with the spaces provided. Now, let's have a little think about the different things you maybe wrote down. In terms of what the functions are, ideologies will have 4 main functions, and these can go in the bottom half of your booklet. First of all, they explain social, political and economic conditions that we all face. Whether that might be a religious belief or even a political one, it will help explain the world around us and also help us evaluate these social conditions, come to terms with, weigh up all the things that are occurring around us. Further to this, it also orients people to help them find our place in society. Our worldview of society will help us develop our own identities. In other words, it allows us to position ourselves, find our place within that society. And of course, not only will it help us find our identity and our place, but give us a plan. It might dictate the plan of political or social actions. It gives meaning to our lives. It gives us direction. It helps motivate the things that we do in our society. However, negative aspects of some ideologies mean that they can often be viewed as factually or even morally wrong. So just as a little exercise, can you think of any ideologies that might be factually or morally wrong, and how the propagation of these ideologies may have harmed the whole of society or maybe harmed a small group of people, a minority group perhaps? Just as a little prompt there, I'll put some images underneath, but you can choose any of your own. Now, obviously, the prompt gives you some ideas of where ideologies can actually be harmful. The bottom image is obviously a quite striking photograph of the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan, who are an American group of white nationalists who believe that people of colour have no place in their society and were involved in numerous violent and aggressive acts towards people of colour across America for many years. Luckily, they themselves, the Ku Klux Klan, are in a real minority these days, but did a lot of damage throughout the past century. We've talked about fundamentalism and how when some religions feel undermined or perhaps under threat, Some groups within that religion can turn to fundamentalism, creating us and them scenarios, resorting to aggressive acts. And of course, Islamic fundamentalism is just one example, but an obvious example of how an ideological system of Islam being the only true faith and only true way of behaving in society has led to extremism and even in some cases terrorism. The figure you might see on the top left there is a guy called Alex Jones, who is not a religious fundamentalist and not even part of a specific ideological group such as the Ku Klux Klan. However, as a broadcaster and I guess internet personality really, he spread quite dangerous rumours and falsehoods in his online forums based on his own ideological belief of governments and deep state being controlling of people. And one of his claims was that the Sandy Hook elementary school massacre that occurred some years back was in fact a hoax and didn't happen. And of course this was demonstrably untrue, and as a consequence Alex Jones has had to pay over $1 billion in damages to the families of the Sandy Hook victims. Nevertheless, his spreading of these rumours and his quite sizable internet following meant that a lot of people did believe these ideologies, which of course was harmful to not only the families but a lot of other people within that community. So just to kind of give you a list of things that ideologies may be, they may be distorted, they may be false or even mistaken ideas about the world that could be spread. There often can be ideas that conceal the interests of a group. So ideologies may actually be almost a way of covering up the true concerns of a specific group. They are ideas that maybe act as a conservative force. They may prevent the changes in society by misleading people. And as well as this, ideologies can often be beliefs that are irrational and even try to protect themselves by being closed to criticism. Now, as I said, ideologies can be political, but they can also be religious. And if you consider the comparisons between those and some of the things we looked at with fundamentalism, you can see the connections, hopefully. And the term of ideology, whilst it does just straightforwardly mean a worldview or a belief system, it can often be used in a kind of derogatory way, really. If people use the term ideology to describe a belief system, it often means that they imply or they think that belief system is wrong. It's used in quite a derogatory way in many cases. Now, again, other than religion, I'm hoping you can see the connection between this and Marx. In fact, this is where we originally looked at the ideas of ideologies. So just as a recap, how many classes does Marx's thought divide society into, and what are they called? And what are the characteristics and functions of each class? Well, of course, according to Marx, there were two classes, the ruling class or bourgeoisie, and the proletariat or working classes. The function of the bourgeoisie was to own the means of production. And of course, the proletariat, all they owned was their labour, but of course they were working for the bourgeoisie to maintain the capitalist system. And according to Marx, the ruling classes would have their own ideological system, and these ideologies, which we call the dominant ideology, includes a belief that equality is against human nature and will never work, a belief that poor people must be lazy or stupid, as we have a meritocracy, so everyone has a chance to succeed, and if they don't, then that's their own fault. And the bourgeoisie also have an ideological system that believes that ethnic minorities are inferior, which divides the proletariat into a kind of black and white divide, a divide and conquer. And this approach to splitting the working classes, the proletariat, almost against each other, is something that will prevent the class consciousness occurring. So if you have a look at those ideologies that are included in the bourgeois ideological system, then you see that all of them reinforce that false class consciousness. Essentially, if everybody buys into this system, everybody has this belief system, then it will stop the uprising that Marx has talked about that could end capitalism. However, in Marx's view, the bourgeoisie will use these dominant ideologies, known as the ruling class ideology, to create that false consciousness among the proletariat and try to prevent change. And as pessimistic as that may sound, he still thought that ultimately the working classes would develop their true class consciousness and unite to overthrow capitalism. Well, Marx was writing a long time ago, and certainly in a lot of part of the Western hemisphere, that overthrowing of capitalism hasn't seemed to have occurred yet. This is why we see a writer called Antonio Gramsci developing Marx's ideas. Now, he had a name for the ruling class ideology, not just the dominant ideology. He referred to it as hegemony, or hegemony, as you'll sometimes hear it pronounced. And what he meant by this, and for you to put the definition into your booklets, is leadership or dominance, especially by one state or social group over others. In other words, the bourgeoisie are able to take control of different institutions and use those institutions to reinforce the dominant ideology or reinforce the hegemony. This control over society is not done by force through violence or aggression. It's done through the control and manipulation of ideas, often to make them seem like they're legitimate or common sense. So, for example, we have some of the ruling classes. For example, in the last parliament, Suella Braverman as Home Secretary, who believed that migrants crossing the channel were a threat to our society. Then we often see these messages repeated through other institutions in society, other political parties, but also through our media, who have been quite derogatory about migrants, referring to them often as a swarm of people, or dehumanising terms like flooding our society. And of course, other media outlets will reinforce this by talking to people who have shared beliefs. Now, Gramsci will argue that the working class actually can still develop ideas that will challenge this ruling class hegemony. He says that the proletariat have a kind of dual consciousness. They have a mixture of the hegemonic ideas that are put forward by the bourgeoisie, but they also have their own ideas based on their real experience of exploitation. The working classes see the hegemonic and ruling class ideology, but they also see the things that bourgeoisie do not see. For example, they understand that despite ruling classes' determination to believe that there is a meritocracy, or that everything is fair and working, the working classes, the proletariat, will see poverty, they'll see unemployment, and they'll understand that exploitation does happen. Now, because of this dual consciousness, the working classes are not blinded by the ruling classes, who are attempting to present their ideas as the best way to run society for everyone, and therefore, like Marx, Gramsci believes that class consciousness is still possible. In other words, for Gramsci, this hegemony is a struggle. It's a battle between competing ideas. So you can make a list here of all the different issues in society that you feel that perhaps the bourgeoisie, the ruling classes, choose to ignore or don't seem to care about or don't seem to maybe even encounter in their real lives, which the proletariat would be aware of. Okay, just to reinforce some of the things that we've looked at over the past couple of pages, just watch the video and, as always, make some notes in your booklet as well.
Hegemony refers to the dominance of one group over others. This dominance is often not achieved through direct force, but through the consensual acceptance of the ruling group's values, beliefs, and norms by the subordinate groups. The concept of hegemony was significantly developed by the Italian Marxist philosopher Antonio Gramsci in the early 20th century. Gramsci expanded the traditional Marxist focus on economic determinism by highlighting the role of ideology and cultural leadership in maintaining the power of the ruling class. Gramsci's theory of hegemony posits that the ruling class maintains its dominance not merely through political and economic control, but by shaping the cultural and ideological landscape. This process, which he referred to as cultural hegemony, involves the propagation of a worldview that justifies and legitimizes the existing social order. Through institutions such as education, religion, and the media, the ruling class disseminates its ideology, which becomes the common sense of the time, accepted by the majority as natural and inevitable. In a hegemonic society, the values and beliefs of the dominant group are internalized by subordinate groups, often without conscious awareness. This internalization ensures social cohesion and stability, as it reduces the likelihood of resistance or rebellion. The hegemonic process is subtle and pervasive, making it difficult for individuals to recognize the ways in which they are complicit in their own subordination. An example of hegemony can be observed in the United States during the post-World War II era. The American dream, which promotes the idea that anyone can achieve success through hard work and determination, is a hegemonic ideology. It serves to justify the capitalist economic system and the socio-economic inequalities inherent in it. By embracing the American dream, individuals from various socio-economic backgrounds accept the existing social order, believing that their status is a result of their own efforts, rather than systemic factors. Hegemony also operates at the international level, where powerful states exert influence over weaker states through cultural, economic, and political means. This form of global hegemony often involves the spread of the dominant state's values and norms, which are adopted by other states either voluntarily or through coercion. For instance, the spread of Western democratic ideals and capitalist economic practices globally can be seen as a form of Western hegemony. Critics of hegemony argue that it perpetuates inequality and inhibits social change by masking the true sources of power and exploitation. They emphasize the need for critical consciousness and resistance to challenge hegemonic structures. Social movements, counter-hegemonic discourses, and alternative media play crucial roles in exposing and contesting the dominant ideology.
So hopefully you can see there that their argument, or the idea of hegemony, is quite a compelling argument. We as a society have evolved over the centuries and millennia, of course, and whereas once we might have just accepted that the ruling classes could control people through force, and if we disagreed with what they were saying, with the ruling classes saying, they would throw us into prison, or maybe in previous times even, chop our heads off or whatnot. These days we would find that kind of force just for disagreeing with ideas unacceptable. And so the ruling classes have to work out a way of maintaining their control and their exploitation. And the best and easiest way to do that is through the control of ideas, making us believe into the system ourselves by using each of the different institutions available to them. So hopefully you can see the similarity between this and the ideas we discussed with ideological state apparatus as well, how every institution can play its part in reinforcing hegemony, whether that is quite obviously the media or the education system or the economy. According to Gramsci, what's required is a political party that has a group of what he refers to as organic intellectuals, workers who through their anti-capitalist struggles have able to develop a class consciousness, and then, only then, will they be able to overthrow the capitalist system. What do you think of Gramsci's views, though? Is it just we're being controlled by ideas and that's why we're not able to overthrow the capitalist system? Is it only that we need to develop these and find these organic intellectuals and that's the only thing that's stopping the proletariat from regaining power? Think about other factors that would prevent workers from actually rebelling or striking. Well, some critics argue that it's not the existence of a dominant ideology that keeps the workers in line and prevents them from overthrowing capitalism. Abercrombie in 2015 says that it's actually the economic factors, such as fear of unemployment, that keeps workers from rebelling. And that's, again, quite a compelling argument as well, isn't it? It was all very well and good saying that if enough people gained their class consciousness, they could overthrow it altogether. But of course, fear for unemployment, fear for missing out, particularly in a capitalist and consumerist society which promises so much, and it makes us feel that we should always have the things that our neighbours have, makes it very difficult for perhaps the proletariat to consider overthrowing the bourgeoisie. Well, we'll take these ideas on to look at ideology, and specifically the ideology of nationalism, which again we touched on briefly when we talked about fundamentalist beliefs, and we said how actually nationalism can become a fundamentalist belief of its own. So just a quick reminder of a definition that you can put in your booklets here. Nationalism is identification with one's own nation and support for its interests, especially to the exclusion or the detriment of the interests of other nations. In other words, it's loving your country so much that actually you feel that it should be better off than other nations, even if that means that it's to their detriment. It also can mean nationalism, the advocacy or support for the political independence of a particular nation or people. And we've seen a number of countries gain their independence, usually from Britain or other colonial powers, over the past couple of centuries. India and the United States of America are two really obvious ones. And sometimes this is through peaceful means, or sometimes it's through violence and war. Now, of course, because of this, more and more countries gaining independence from colonial powers, nationalism has become an important political ideology that has had a major impact in the world over the past 200 years. Otherwise, arguably, those countries would not have been able to claim their own independence. Nationalism claims that nations are real. They're distinctive communities, each with their own unique characteristics and long shared history. Obviously, America, India and other nations that claimed their independence from Britain felt that they were separate and distinct enough from Britain that they should be treated and seen as their own country. And of course, part of any nation's bid to become independent is the fact that it believes it should be self-governing, have control over its own destiny. But this nationalistic ideology gets taken further, whereby nationalist loyalty and identity is believed to come before everything else, even before class and before religion, so that you are defined primarily by what nation you come from, what your nationality is. And even though we've been using examples of countries breaking from Britain's identity, Britain itself has a very strong nationalist identity, and we've seen that over the years in different situations where it's been able to help us out. A belief in Britain as a sovereign nation during the Second World War was part of our strengths, working with our allies. But we've also seen it more recently with perhaps the campaign to leave the European Union in 2016, where those advocating a break from the EU, wanting to vote for Brexit, used national ideology as a way of persuading people that we were able to take control of our destiny back again if we were to become separate from the EU and Brexit. Okay, so there is an article separate from your booklets, okay, but you can, on one of the pages of your booklets, create a mind map all about nationalism, okay, and summarise the different views of nationalism according to following perspective: Marxism, functionalism, and the work of Gellner as well. Just as you can see from the slide here, put the ideology of nationalism in the centre of your mind map, and then go outward from there. So let's consider the work of another writer, Karl Mannheim. Mannheim seems to believe that all belief systems are really partial or one-sided worldviews. And he says this is because ideologies are the viewpoint of one particular group or class and its interests. So, for example, patriarchal ideologies really only benefit a subset of men in society and not everybody else. Because of this, Mannheim distinguishes between two broad types of belief system or worldviews. There is the ideological thought, which is similar to what we've considered so far, where ideological thought justifies things being kept exactly as they are. It reflects the position and the interests of the ruling classes and the bourgeoisie. And it also, ideological thought means that the ruling classes will benefit from maintaining the status quo. Therefore, their belief system tends to be conservative and hierarchical. In other words, it slows down any kind of progressiveness. The other worldview or belief system that Mannheim talks about is utopian thought. Now, for Mannheim, utopian thought is the kind of belief system that will justify social change. It reflects the position and interests of underprivileged classes rather than the ruling classes. It can be a way of offering a vision of how society could be. So in some cases, it might even favour radical change to a society. And of course, your mind will be hopefully immediately going to Marxism as a thought and as an example of utopian thought. So how do we achieve this utopia that Mannheim is discussing? Well, in his view, the solution is really to detach intellectuals away from the social groups that they represent and create what he calls free-flowing intelligentsia. And that, he believes, would stand above the conflict between different ideologies. This means that each class there is, the working classes, the ruling classes, they have their own intellectuals, but they will always promote their own ideologies. Because these intellectuals are part of a class, they don't experience all of the aspects of society. So they can't create a set of rules and norms that would benefit everybody because they're unaware of the needs of the other group. But this is where Mannheim's ideas kick in, because if they were freed from their class, this free-flowing intelligentsia would be able to synthesize elements from across different ideologies and utopias to arrive at what he describes as a total worldview. And that total worldview would obviously work in the interests of everybody in society. So as an example of Mannheim's first points about how often people can be stuck in their own group. Obviously, in the previous government, whilst Rishi Sunak was Chancellor of the Exchequer, he made the decision not to boost universal credit and benefits for people. But of course, as we know, Rishi Sunak might not really empathise with or understand the struggles of everyday people. And of course, his decision not to boost benefits put people, particularly in a cost of living crisis, into an even worse financial situation. People using food banks more frequently, not affording to be able to heat or rent houses, creating a bigger divide between the bourgeoisie, ruling class and the proletariat. But what do you think about Mannheim's ideas? Do you think it will ever be possible for a free-flowing intelligentsia to emerge from society? Would it be possible to separate the key intellectuals from both the bourgeoisie and the proletariat to find some sort of common ground? Give your opinion in the space that's in the booklet for this. Well, many elements of different political ideologies are so opposed to one another. It is, and as I'm sure you've put, very hard to imagine how you can synthesize a number of different opposing ideas. And so, just as a few examples, can we ever really believe that a Marxist idea about the need for a classless society could be combined with a conservative idea that hierarchies are essential and beneficial? Can we imagine the feminist who believes in equality in society that could be aligned with a patriarchal ideology around gender expression, gender roles and gender norms? And can we ever imagine the Black Lives Matter movement being modified to align even slightly with those of white nationalism? So last couple of thoughts here, we'll move on to a feminist perspective on ideology. So Pauline Marx, who's no relation to Karl Marx, argues that because gender differences are a feature of all society, there exist ideologies to justify those gender differences. So just have a quick read of this. I'll read it too, and then you can complete the notes in the side of the box on this page of the handout. Just the key points, key arguments, and so on, so that you've got something to revise from without having to read the dense type again. So, feminism and ideology. Feminists see gender inequality as the fundamental division in society, and patriarchal ideology as playing a key role in legitimating it. Because gender difference is a feature of all societies, there exist many different ideologies to justify. For example, Pauline Marx describes how ideas from science have been used to justify excluding women from education. She quotes 19th century male doctors, scientists and educationalists expressing the view that educating females would lead to the creation of a new race of puny and unfeminine females, and disqualify women from their true vocation, namely the nurturing of the next generation. In addition to patriarchal ideologies in science, those embodied in religious beliefs and practices have also been used to define women as inferior. There are numerous examples from a wide range of religions of the idea that women are ritually impure or unclean, particularly because of childbirth or menstruation. This has given rise to purification rituals such as churching after a woman has given birth. In some Christian churches, a new mother may not receive communion until after she's been churched. However, not all elements of religious belief systems subordinate women. For example, there is evidence that before the emergence of the monotheistic patriarchal religions, matriarchal religions with female deities were widespread, with female priests and the celebration of fertility cults. Similarly, in Hinduism, goddesses have often been portrayed as creators of the universe. So again, another example of ideology informing ideological belief systems informing inequality. So this can be from a religious perspective, but of course also some political perspectives as well. So just to conclude, here's a summary of some of the things we've talked about before you can complete the rest of your booklet. Ideology is often defined as a one-sided worldview, which will legitimate a specific group's interests. Marxists see institutions such as religion and media, which will produce middle-class ideology. Nationalism is an ideology that binds modern societies together. Mannerheim distinguishes between ideological and utopian thought. Feminists see patriarchal ideology as legitimating gender inequality. So, what you can do with the rest of your booklet is read through the notes that are on there, the essays, and of course summarise them, highlight them, so you've got those ready for your revision. So thanks very much for listening. Please make sure you complete all the booklets, and as always, if anything doesn't make sense, make sure you ask me to explain something again. At the same time, do further reading as well. There's plenty of videos and essays out there on these topics, and you will always benefit for having that being wider read in your essays. Thanks again, and that's it for ideology.